Hey Shooby-Doodlers, how are you doing? Today I'm going to read you another story from my book, Little Horrors. It's called The Bone Man. But let's not talk about it. Come along and read with me. Little horrors shiver with fear and shake with laughter. The Bone Man. Yuck! It was horrible! My sister Kim and I were staying with Aunt Loopy. Her dog Treacle had jumped into the pond and shaken cold, slimy water all over me. "Come here, you little terror," I shouted, chasing Treacle out of the back gate and into the wilderness beyond. Treacle ran and ran until I lost sight of her. We waited ages for her to come back, but she had just vanished. Aunt Loopy spoke in a scary, creepy voice. "Oh, I hope Whistling Jack hasn't got her." Oh, shivers ran up and down my spine. Who's Whistling Jack?" I asked. "Oh, he was a terrifying pirate who whistled tunes while he tortured his enemies," said Aunt Loopy. "The stories say that he was buried with his treasure somewhere here in the wilderness. His ghost whistles to frighten away treasure seekers." Oh. As I looked for Treacle, I heard a weird, muffled barking from below my feet. I bent down to listen, and my stomach did a somersault. The ground was swallowing my left leg. Oh, yes, something cold and wet pressed against my ankle. Yeah, hot, clammy breaths rippled over my leg. Something bristly licked my knee. Panicking, I yanked my leg out. A whistling sound drifted out of the hole, making my blood run cold. "Ah, it's Whistling Jack!" I shouted. "I can hear him!" Aunt Loopy ran over and peered into the gaping darkness. "It's Treacle," she laughed. "She must have fallen down the hole like you did." She grabbed Treacle's collar and pulled her out. Treacle bounced about, proudly showing off the bone that she held in her mouth. And when she breathed, the bone made a squeaky, tooting whistle. Aunt Loopy examined the bone. "How interesting," she said. "That's what was making the noise. We should show this to an expert." The next day we went to the museum to see the museum's bone expert, Dr. Spindleshanks. You could hardly move in Dr. Spindleshanks' office. On a pile of books, a human skeleton sat grinning at us. We froze in horror. A dry, dusty voice said, "Hello," behind us, making us jump out of our skin. An old man stood in the doorway. He was so bald and thin, he looked like the skeleton's brother. "I'm Dr. Spindleshanks," he croaked. "How can I help you?" When Aunt Loopy had recovered from the fright, she showed him the piece of bone. Dr. Spindleshanks compared it with the bone on the skeleton and became very excited when we told him where we had found it. We had to show him the exact spot on a map. His eyes narrowed, and he whispered to himself, "It could be where Whistling Jack is buried." He winked at us. "Keep this secret. If word gets out, the place will be full of treasure seekers with metal detectors. We'll start investigating tomorrow." That night, we were making hot chocolate in the kitchen. Kim looked really worried. "What if it is where Whistling Jack is buried?" she asked. He won't haunt us, will he?" "There's no such thing as ghosts," I said hopefully. As I spoke, Aunt Loopy's cat's itchy, scratchy antlers tore through the cat flap, hissing and spitting. Treacle growled and pawed to be let out of the back door. Through the window, far out in the dark wilderness, 2 glowing red eyes swayed hypnotically. Aunt Loopy opened the back door a crack. An eerie sound floated across the still night air. Someone or something was whistling. Treacle barked, "Woof!" and burst through the door. As Treacle went in for the attack, I saw a terrifying shape in the distance. It looked like a living skeleton. It's Whistling Jack," I gasped. There was a terrible wailing and whistling and barking. Before the red eyes snapped off and everything went quiet. With a torch and a walking stick to protect us, we crept out into the darkness. Something was whistling in the hole. Had Whistling Jack got our Treacle? Aunt Loopy's torch lit up the ghastly scene. Treacle stood guard over a pale, thin body. It raised a scrawny, bony hand towards us. It pleaded with the feeble, ghostly voice. "Help! Dr. Spindleshanks," we all cried. Back in Aunt Loopy's house, Dr. Spindleshanks showed us his metal detector. It had 2 red lights on the front, and it whistled when it found something metal. That's what we had seen and heard. Dr. Spindleshanks hung his head. "I'm sorry, I couldn't wait until tomorrow. I wanted to be the one who found Whistling Jack's treasure." "So you think it really is where Whistling Jack is buried?" Aunt Loopy asked excitedly. Dr. Spindleshanks shook his head. "No, that hole is an old animal lair. Your bone probably came from a fox's dinner. If the story of Whistling Jack's treasure is true," he continued, "I think someone would have found it by now." Phew! We went to bed, happy. There was no ghost of Whistling Jack after all. Next day we went for another walk and Treacle disappeared again. Weird, warbling whistles drifted out of another hole in the ground. I stuck my arm in and felt around for Treacle. Something wet and bristly licked my other hand. Something wet and grisly also licked my face. It was Treacle. But if she wasn't in the hole, then who or what was? And who or what was whistling that creepy, eerie tune? Ah! It's Whistling Jack! Well, I hope that story wasn't too scary or hairy for you. I'm making a lot of story videos on the Shoo Rayner drawing channel at the moment, so make sure you are subscribed for lots more, and click that little bell next to the subscribe button to get notified of new stories. In the meantime, keep watching, and reading, and I'll see you next time. You take care now. Bye-bye.